Journey through Persia, a treasure trove of memories. Episode 1. Written by Abdulmaalik Hashmi. Abdulmaalik Hashmi writes like a fellow who's always got one foot in the door and the other on a train bound for the next adventure. He's been all over Iran, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Japan, Malaysia, collecting stories the way a man might gather trinkets in a dusty shop. His travel tales aren't mere reports of where he's been. No, they're more like windows that open up and let you breathe in the soul of a place, Malaysia's lively bustle, Iran's poetry hanging in the air, Japan's quiet grace. And this tale of Iran? Well, it's not just a trip, it's a map of memories, scribbled by the hand of a man who can't sit still for long. This journey was a dream, one of those old, stubborn notions that lie buried in the dust of time, only to spring back to life when you least expect it, like a church bell clanging through a drowsy town. The first time I ever heard of going to Iran was in 1991, when my classmate Umar Farooq, brimming with the kind of enthusiasm that only boys with no money can afford, leaned over and said, "We ought to go to Iran." Back then, I was just a schoolboy, my thoughts as unsteady as a colt on ice, my dreams as light as my pockets, and my finances best left unmentioned. That desire was like an unfired clay pot sitting by the river, waiting for some grand flood to carry it off, though I had no idea if the flood would ever come. A whole decade slipped by. Time, that old trickster, opened up a whole mess of doors and showed me a heap of new roads to follow. And then, in July 2001, while I was sitting at my desk at Imam Mohammed bin Saud University in Saudi Arabia, this old dream of mine decided to stir itself awake again. The summer holidays were rolling in, and my heart, now that pesky thing, whispered, "Now's the time." So, I went to my older brothers for some advice. They scratched their chins and said, "If you've got to go, go on ahead, but don't you go by yourself." Now, here's the thing about travel, it ain't just a longing. No sir, it needs two things, time and some means to make it happen. Well, I had the time, but I couldn't find a soul to tag along who could afford the cost or clear the schedule. So, I made up my mind to go it alone. The streets were alive with the fuss of local elections, and there I was, standing in the middle of all that noise, fighting my own battle, one to turn a dream into something real. The moment I caught a break from the hustle, I woke up that traveler's itch inside me, packed up what little I had, and just like that, the dream I'd been nursing began to take shape and walk out the door with me. The paths of travel always seem to spring from some thought or other, a dream, a quest, or just a little ripple that rises in the heart after reading a few lines in a book. My desire to visit Iran was no different. It wasn't just some touristy fancy, but a mental pursuit, one that was sparked inside me after reading Maulana Maududi's Khilafah and the Monarchy. In the dusty corners of that book's pages, I caught a glimpse of the Shia Renaissance, a civilization with its own unique blend of intellectual, political, and religious hues, which, after centuries of wandering through time's fog, was still as vibrant as ever. It seemed impossible to just sit there and content myself with what was written in those pages. The words had stirred a restlessness inside me. I thought to myself, why not see these people up close? Why not walk through those streets where beliefs are carved into the walls of history, where people don't just think of religion as a philosophy but live it as a way of life? Getting a visa. Well, getting a visa, you see, is usually a serious business, but for me, it turned into a bit of a literary and linguistic conundrum. It was like walking into a maze, where every door had a new riddle to solve. I went over to the Iranian consulate on Halley Road, Quetta, and got myself a visa form all in Persian, of course. I took it home, full of confidence, as though Persian were my native tongue, and set about filling it out like it was the simplest thing in the world. Now, here's where things took an interesting turn. The form mentioned two kinds of visas, pilgrimage and tourism. Well, I'm no fool, so I thought I had it all figured out. Pilgrimage visa, naturally, must be for the everyday traveler, because ziyarat, pilgrimage, just means a visit, doesn't it? As for Jahangir, tourism, well, that word brought to mind a vagabond, a drifter, someone without a care in the world. So, I confidently marked the pilgrimage visa and filled out the rest of the form, patting myself on the back like I had cracked the whole diplomatic code. But as sure as the sun shines, the truth hit me like a thunderclap. Turns out, the pilgrimage visa is for folks visiting holy sites, and if you're just a regular tourist, like myself, you need the tourism visa. So, there I was, eager to get a closer look at Iran, but already tripping up at the very first step. Now, what's the point of regretting after the fact, when the birds have already had their feast on the field? Holding that visa in my hand for a moment, I couldn't help but feel like I was holding someone else's invitation. But, as all travelers know, this was just the first bump on the road, and a true traveler keeps moving forward, even after a stumble or two. Well, choosing Iran was a mighty sensible thing to do, if I do say so myself. For one, it was breathing the same air as my own homeland, just a little beyond the border right there, connected to my own Baluchistan. And then, you see, it was a place where the whole world of Shirai culture, politics, and society stood tall and proud, with all the fine details that make it what it is. So, I thought to myself, why wait? It was high time to set out on this adventure. Some dreams, aren't just meant for reading about in books, they're meant to land right down on the solid ground of reality. Now, every trip has its story, of course, but some trips turn into mighty fine yarns when fate decides to throw in a little of its own mischief. My quest for an Iranian visa was one of those trips, a fool's mistake, an accidental choice, and then, just when I thought I'd messed everything up, fate took a turn and sent me straight to the right place. The conversation with the visa officer. Well, let me tell you, getting the visa wasn't exactly a smooth affair. As I stood there in front of that consulate window, a rather stern-looking Iranian officer was peering over my visa application with the same kind of concentration a dog gives a bone. He gave my form a once-over, glanced at of Maulana Abdulmaalik recommendation letter, and then, after a pause that seemed like it lasted a whole minute, he leaned in and pronounced my name with a flourish that would have made a king feel self-conscious.
آیا اسم شما آقای عبدالمالک هاشمی است؟
Now, let me tell you, hearing my name in that lilting Persian accent felt mighty strange, like a big, heavy coat being draped over my shoulders. It was like my name had suddenly been given a promotion, and was walking around with a bit more swagger than it ever had before. I nodded, and the officer, with a smile as wide as a barn door, said,
یک هفته بعد بیایید.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, meant, come back in a week. Now, here's the thing about Persian that I found real curious. It's a sound that adds a kind of dignity to the thing, like putting a shiny buckle on a belt. Abdulmaalik, which was always just a name to me, suddenly sounded like something belonging to a long-lost royal family. I couldn't help but wonder, did that officer think I was related to the big shot, Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani? You see, Rafsanjani was the president of Iran at the time, and let me tell you, every time I met a local in Iran and mentioned my name, they'd flash a mischievous grin and hit me with the same old question.
آیا شما از نزدیکان رئیس اشمی رفسنجانی است؟
Which, in plain English, means, are you a relative of President Hashemi Rafsanjani? I couldn't figure out whether they were genuinely curious or just enjoying the fun of imagining me as some distant cousin of the great man. The visa stamp and the path to pilgrimage. I was lost in my thoughts, pondering the mysteries of fate, when, like a thunderclap in the quiet, came a message from the Iranian consulate. Your visa is ready. In the blink of an eye, and with not a single bump in the road, my passport had been graced with the golden stamp of Iran. I found myself holding that passport in my hands, the sticker on it gleaming like a badge of honor, its words declaring my destiny, type of visa, pilgrimage. A pilgrimage, eh? Now, I'd been hoping for a tourist visa, imagining leisurely strolls through the markets and stops at every charming ruin, but it seemed fate had different plans for me. Pilgrimage, the thing said, as if I were some kind of saint or wanderer on a mission of divine importance. I had to chuckle, perhaps this was the work of Maulana Abdulmaalik letter, or maybe it was just a trick of fortune, spinning its web in ways I couldn't begin to understand. But seeing as the door was wide open and all that, why not embrace the pilgrimage alongside the sightseeing? So, here I was, set to embark on a journey where history and faith waltzed together, each road stretching out before me with the promise of new stories where the whispers of Iran's ancient past could still be heard in the wind, and every corner might hide a forgotten piece of its legacy.